Before we dive in, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's wild how many of us are spread across the world, but meeting in the same mystery at the same moment. It began in September of 1943. A young American fighter pilot, Robert Bobby Mitchell, climbed into the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang at a windswept English airfield. 28 missions behind him. One more to go before anyone dared call him lucky. His squadron had been told it was a routine reconnaissance hop over Nazi-occupied France. He checked the gauges, touched the picture taped to his panel, a smiling young woman named Sarah, and rolled down the runway into a gray English sky. He never came back. The War Department sent his wife a polite, final letter and a folded flag. Missing in action, presumed dead. The map they sent the family marked a vague patch over northern France. Somewhere in that scratch of ink, they said, Bobby's Mustang went down. The war moved on. Sarah remarried in 1946. Photographs yellowed. And for 60 years, the truth sat in the dark, as quiet as metal. Decades later, two hikers moved through a deep belt of the Belgian Ardennes, the kind of forest that swallows footsteps. Something hard peeked through the moss. They cleared away leaves and root, then called local police, who called the military, who called an agency in the United States. Beneath the soil, angled like a buried spear, was a skeletal fuselage of a P-51. The tail number matched a file that should have been simple, but wasn't. Lieutenant Robert Mitchell. The location made no sense. The Army had sworn he vanished over northern France. The Ardennes is roughly 200 miles away. That was the first lie cracking in the light. The second was written in holes. A neat constellation of punctures along the port side of the fuselage, impact that read like a diagram to anyone who has studied combat losses. These didn't come from a Messerschmitt screaming out of the sun. They came from below, rifle or machine gun fire from the ground. The third lie sat in the cockpit, wrapped in wax fabric and stamped in block letters, classified. After 6 decades of winter and rain, the envelope was still sealed. Before we go further, quick pit stop. If stories like this, where one detail refuses to fit and the whole picture starts to bend, are your thing, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this rabbit hole is worth sharing. When Captain David Mitchell, Bobby's grandson, now serving as a liaison with the Joint Missing Personnel Accounting Agency, got the call, he expected heartbreak. Most finds turn out to be misidentified wreckage or the wrong war, the wrong era. But the tail number matched. The service photo in the database matched. And then the database threw a curveball, a classification banner above David's clearance. Not a common thing for a 1943 file. David flew to Brussels. He crossed into the forest at first light with a Belgian detective named Laurent Dubois, a methodical man whose patience was honed by decades of police work. The wreck site felt like a place where time pooled. The nose was driven deep into the hillside, the tail shorn, the cockpit remarkably intact. No burn pattern, no blackened soil, just cold aluminum and the quiet of trees. Dubois handed David an evidence bag containing a cracked leather wallet, 2 faded photographs, and that sealed envelope. One photo was a woman from the dashboard, Sarah, alive and bright. The other looked like a unit shot, but it wasn't clean. American jackets, British caps, free French insignia, and one man in a civilian coat. It felt less like a squadron and more like a meeting. Back at the station, under lights and cameras, Belgian technicians opened the envelope according to protocol. Out slid 3 things. A typed briefing stamped ultra secret, a hand-drawn map, crosshatch in pencil, and a list of names with German addresses. David read the first line of the briefing and felt the ground shift under his feet. Operation Nightingale. Primary objective: extraction of high-value Allied intelligence assets from a German facility that did not officially exist. Secondary objective: destruction of said facility to prevent reprisals and compromise. Pilot: Lieutenant Robert Mitchell. Status: expendable. Expendable is a sterile word on paper. In the real world, it means your chances of coming home are not a consideration. The map marked an extraction point Alpha, a short walk from where the P-51 had augured in. The names on the list were not random. a Royal Navy cryptographer, a Free French intelligence liaison, an RAF photo reconnaissance specialist, a U.S. Army Signal Corps officer who specialized in German radio intercepts. Not ordinary POWs, men who understood how the game was actually played. If you're still watching right now, let me ask a quick favor. Drop "I'm still here" in the comments so we know who our ride or die crowd is. It really does help the video reach more people who love this kind of deep dive. In the days that followed, the pattern sharpened. Resistance archives at a Belgian university recorded unusual German activity in late September 1943 near a site designated Stalag 17C, a small, selective camp for Allied prisoners who'd been caught carrying sensitive information. There were reports of equipment shipments for specialized interrogation. There were orders from Berlin, and there was a diary entry written in a cramped hand by a local fighter, dated September 28th. American plane down near 17C. Pilot reached the ground alive. Germans searched for days. Before he died, pilot said, "Nightingale's flying into a trap." David asked for more time in the archives. Anonymous texts began showing up on his phone. "Stop digging. Some secrets are buried for good reason." Another. "Your grandfather died protecting secrets that can still get people killed. Walk away." The tone was a cold hand at the back of the neck. And then an old man stepped out of the past. 97 years old, thin as a reed, eyes like glass. He introduced himself as Frank Henley, U.S. Army Signal Corps, captured in 43, incarcerated at Stalag 17C. He had been waiting, he said, for someone with the last name Mitchell to come asking questions. He carried a worn leather portfolio and opened it like an altar. Inside were sketches of the camp, notes in Bobby's precise hand, and a folded German report that should never have left an office. Frank said Bobby didn't die in the crash. He hit hard but lived, moved through trees and mud, and by midnight slid through the wire. He had memorized the camp's layout from Allied files, learned the rhythm of the patrol boots, and found Frank in the shadows of the barracks. Bobby told him the mission was to pull 4 men over 3 nights through a drainage tunnel that ran from the kitchen to a culvert beyond the fence. He'd lead them one by one, then vanish with the last man and radio a pickup. They made their first move before dawn. Lieutenant Commander Hartwell, the Royal Navy cryptographer, went down into the wet crawl space with Bobby guiding. They were halfway to the culvert when floodlights snapped on like noon and German shouts pinned the night to the ground. Guards closed on both ends, rifles barking. The tunnel wasn't a secret at all. It had been a net. Bobby was captured. Frank watched from a barracks window as they dragged him into the commandant's office. The light inside burned until sunup. At first light, 2 soldiers carried a tarp-wrapped bundle toward the motor pool. Frank never saw Bobby again. But before the guards found him, Bobby had done 2 things that changed everything. He copied a German report listing Allied radio frequencies and operation timings. Proof the enemy knew details they shouldn't. And, using a compact transmitter, he'd sent a final burst. In his last handwritten note, lines cramped in the margins, he wrote a name. Blackbird compromised. Germans possess advanced details of extraction protocols. Source inside Allied intelligence. If I don't make it, investigate all missions authorized through Blackbird Channel. Lieutenant R. Mitchell. If this is the first time you've heard the name Blackbird in a World War II context, tap subscribe. We got more coming that connects dots you didn't know were on the same page. David took Frank's portfolio to the U.S. Embassy. He expected a door to open. Instead, 2 men in suits introduced themselves as Dr. William Stone and Richard Hayes from a historical classification review board. They had the careful smiles of people who decide which truths are allowed outside. They told David Nightingale had been a deception operation, that Bobby had volunteered to appear to fail, that his expendable status was theater for German ears. They offered commendations, full military honors, even a settlement to ease the family's long uncertainty. Yet he turned over everything and let them contextualize the record. And if he refused, there were other contexts. Mishandling classified materials. Sharing secrets with foreign nationals. A career ended in a hearing room. A name dragged where it didn't belong. They gave him 24 hours to think, and they made sure he understood how long 24 hours can be. Back at the hotel, Detective Du Bois was waiting with Frank, who had pulled a different thread, one he'd been tugging for decades. 7 men had survived 17C. Over the years, each time one of them tried to publish, to speak to a historian, to write to an agency, an accident followed. A fall down the stairs in Paris, a car accident in London, a gas explosion in California, a heart attack during a routine exam. Always tidy. Always enough to pass the smell test if you didn't know where to sniff. Frank had kept clippings, police reports, and most importantly, the last message from a friend named Ernest Kellerman, sent 3 days before he died. I found him. Blackbird is William Garrett, Major, later Colonel, then a Pentagon intelligence liaison. Still alive as of last year. If I don't make it, the evidence is in a safety deposit box in Richmond. Frank drove to Richmond after the funeral. The key was where the note said it would be, behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Inside the box, financial records, photocopies of communications, proof that William Garrett had been receiving money from German intelligence during the war, then from the Soviets during the Cold War, and later from other services over decades. Not ideology. Business. A man who didn't stop when the flags changed. A man who learned that if you stand in the river of secrets long enough, both shores pay you for the water. There's a point in every story like this where you have to decide if you're watching a thriller or a documentary. If you've reached that point, comment, "This is real life," below. It's the moment the movie stops being entertaining and starts being uncomfortable. David and Frank made contact with 3 journalists, Washington, London, Paris, and arranged simultaneous publication. The plan was simple. Once the story was everywhere, it couldn't be buried anywhere. That night, as they worked in a safe room, David's laptop chimed. An incoming video call. The name on the screen made Frank go still. William Garrett. David answered. An elderly man appeared, well-dressed, in a room that was not a care facility. His eyes were bright, amused. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "return what you've stolen." David told him they had evidence. Garrett laughed, called treason an outdated concept, claimed he kept the peace for 60 years by ensuring no nation grew too strong. Balance, he said, like he was talking about furniture. Then he dropped the mask for a sentence. Destroy the files and report to the embassy in 1 hour, or you will learn why some people live long in dangerous work. David recorded everything. Within an hour, texts from the journalists went dark. One detained by the FBI for handling classified materials. One interviewed by British intelligence about sources. One arrested in Paris for possession of documents obtained illegally. On another channel, Du Bois's team intercepted chatter about American special operations flights touching down in Europe for exercises. The net was no longer theoretical. It was moving. This is where I ask the second most important thing I'll ask you tonight. Keep watching to the end. Watch time is what tells the platform to push this story in front of the people who need to hear it, not just the ones who want to. Frank stared into the camera and told Garrett something he'd been saving for 60 years. You made one mistake. You didn't call from your apartment. You called from a government building. By threatening journalists, you stopped being custodian of secrets and started being the subject of a criminal case. We have you on tape, directing witness intimidation across borders. Garrett's gaze flickered. It was enough. Du Bois moved them to a decommissioned NATO communications site, concrete bones and old wires, and they split the evidence. Half with Frank and Du Bois, half with David at the console, pushing data through encrypted links to newsrooms beyond NATO reach, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. For the first time since 1943, the mission had redundancy. If one of them fell, the truth could still fly. As the clock ticked towards synchronized publication, David received one more call. Colonel Janet Thornton, the one person in Washington who had not been a villain in this story, sounded older than she had that morning. "David," she said, "it's bigger than Garrett. He built a parallel network that ran through multiple agencies, multiple countries. People at the highest levels are implicated. Directors are resigning. The director of the CIA says he had no idea what Garrett was doing after retirement. The president is being briefed every hour. Are you warning me?" David asked. I'm telling you that you're holding a live wire. Do not let go. Just before dawn in Europe, which is mid-afternoon in Auckland, a cargo flight took David and Frank out of hemisphere, where Garrett had friends. In a secure room above a harbor the color of old steel, they coordinated final checks. The Melbourne Age confirmed the Swiss bank records. The Wellington Post verified timelines of quiet failures that had a common denominator, an elderly consultant who always seemed to be in a room where cooperation was agreed. The Cape Town Gazette connected dots in Africa that no one had bothered to connect when the dots were brown and far away. With 2 hours to go, a Chinese diplomat called. He said, in crisp English, that they believed a former American officer had been selling Chinese intelligence to Western agencies for decades, and that cooperation might be in everyone's interest. Frank covered the receiver and smiled a humorless smile. When both sides call you about the same man, you're either describing the villain or protagonist, he said. I know which one Garrett is. Publication day broke not with a bang, but with a chorus. Headlines unfurled in 3 languages and a dozen time zones. American officer sold secrets for 60 years. Double agent behind Cold War disasters. Arrests at intelligence agencies across 12 countries. The story included scans of documents, financials, transcripts, and a video clip where William Garrett, age 94, threatened journalists on an international call. By lunch, Garrett was in handcuffs at Langley. By evening, men who had smiled too smoothly for decades were carrying cardboard boxes out of offices with no windows. Frank watched it all in silence, a hand over his mouth, eyes burning. He was 98 now and had lived long enough to hear taps for men who deserved it and the whine of engines for wars that didn't. He put a hand on David's shoulder and said the simplest thing a person can say when a burden shifts, it's over. 6 months later, on a clean Virginia morning, a flag-draped casket settled into the earth at Arlington. The honor guard moved with the precision of a country that no ceremony is an answer to chaos. Sarah was gone by then. Life is short and grief is long, but her grandson stood where she would have stood and took the folded flag. The chaplain spoke about sacrifice, about the peculiar honor reserved for those who go where they are told for reasons they cannot always know. And when a rifle was fired, the sound came back on the stones like a reminder. Names are not erased by time if someone says them out loud. People will argue about the lessons of this story. Some will say one man's treachery can't explain 7 decades of failures. They're right. It wasn't one man. It was a marketplace that learned to call money stability and betrayal balance. Some will say that classification saves lives and that pulling secrets into the light cost them. They're also right. Sometimes. But there's a line between protection and concealment, and it runs straight through a grandson standing over a grave that sat empty for 60 years because no one wanted to look in the right forest. Before we wrap, I'm going to ask the most important thing. Comment with what you think the real cost of secrecy is. Not the necessary kind, the kind that keeps operatives safe and missions intact, but the kind that makes people expendable on paper and then forgets to tell their families the truth. Your answers are the conversation this channel exists to have. After the ceremony, David and Frank walked the orderly rows to the tomb of the unknown soldier. Wind moved across the grounds like a breath. Frank stopped at a bench and pulled a creased photograph from his coat. The same odd group shot David had found in the cockpit. We were so young, he said. We thought wars ended. Some don't. Some get handed to the next pair of hands until someone refuses to drop them. He didn't say much more. He didn't have to. In the years that followed, tribunals wrote new rules about oversight. Parliaments argued on television about who signed what and when. Some of it was theater. Some of it was real. Garrett died in prison, which is not justice, exactly, but it is a kind of punctuation mark that leaves a sentence readable. The agencies kept operating because the world is messy and someone has to do the dangerous work. But the network Garrett built, the parallel thing in the walls, lost power the way rot loses power when you cut out the wood and let light in. There's one last scene I want you to picture. A storage room in a government building no one tours. Shells of box history, and a folder that used to be sealed above a colonel's clearance. A clerk breaks a sticker, because a tribunal said to. Inside, a pilot service record, a mission marked with Bird's name, a note in clean, compact script. Blackbird Compromise. Imagine that page, after 80 years, finally breathing paper air and not dust. That sound you're hearing now? That's not applause. It's the world making room for a truth it should have held long ago. If you made it to this point, you're the reason we can tell stories like this without sponsors yanking the wheel. Tap subscribe if you haven't. Share this with a person in your life who thinks history is tidy. And tell us in the comments, should families of expendable missions be told the truth, even decades later, even if the truth hurts? I'll be in the comments for the first few hours after this goes live. Can't wait to hear what you think. And to the man who flew into a forest with a map, a list of names, and orders that reduce him to a word on a page, we remember you, Lieutenant Robert Bobby Mitchell. Your mission is complete.